freezing in here, man. Yeah, why is it so cold?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much.
He's awesome.
We've been doing this for years.
Robing.
All right, welcome everyone to the Cradle of Aviation and welcome to CradleCon. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tom Tormey. I'm from Cosmic Comic History, and this is G.I. Joe, a real American hero, from comics to cartoons. So thank you all for joining us today. The industry legends that you're seeing before you really don't need an introduction, but at CradleCon we are key masters, not gatekeepers. So with that being said, it is a great honor to introduce famed writer, editor, artist, and creator whose work has defined generations, Mr. Larry Hama. Iconic voiceover actor, multi-time award-winning author, and poet, most famous for us for playing Flint on G.I. Joe, Bill Ratner. Industry legend in the fields of voice acting and dialect coaching, and famously G.I. Joe's Lady J, Miss Mary McDonald Lewis. An accomplished actress both on stage and screen, and recognized throughout the Energon universe as Zartan's dastardly sister Zorana, Miss Lisa Raggio. So if we could begin by telling everybody how in the world the four very talented individuals here got involved with G.I. Joe.
Well, it all started with this one right here, so you better launch us, Larry.
I've been trying to get writing work at Marvel for years. I was an editor there. They wouldn't give me any writing work because they said, "Oh, you're an artist. You can't write." And I had to draw comics for 20 years before they let me write one. And then Hasbro came to Marvel and wanted a comic of G.I. Joe. But at the time, this was in late 70s, early 80s, licensed comics were the total bottom of the barrel as far as comic artists were concerned, because the licensing fee came off the top of the page rate. So anybody that worked on a licensed book was making less money. So why would an A-list or B-list guy, spit in their wallet, and take less money to do the same amount of work? So the editor-in-chief went to every, contract writer at Marvel, and every single one turned it down. Then he called every non-contract writer, which is everybody else in the universe, and they all turned it down. And then he went from editorial office to editorial office, and all the editors and assistant editors and the kid that went out to get coffee, they all turned it down. And my office was literally the last office in the row, and I went, I'll take it, because I had no interest in writing military stuff. I got into the business because I'm a duck man. I wanted to do, ducks. Funny, I was Carl Barks fan, and so, and if they had offered me Barbie, I would have taken Barbie. I just wanted any book to, prove that I could write. And fortunately for me, about 2 months after I did that, Marvel launched its royalty program incentive. So I was getting paid per, for the amount of copies sold. And the first issues went over like almost 1 million. So we were making X-Men numbers. And all of a sudden everybody else wanted to do licensed books. But even then, everybody in all the old pros told me that if you do a toy book, a licensed book, you'll never get offered an A-list book in the industry for the rest of your life. And they were right. I was never offered an A-list book while it was an A-list book. So after I did G.I. Joe for about 6 months, I said, look, you know, it's the #1 selling book. Can I try my hand at writing something else? And they said, G.I. Joe's a fluke. But I'll tell you what, there's this other book that we got that's about to be canceled. It's doing so bad. And I said, well, I'll take that. So I took Wolverine. And within 6 months, that was the #2 selling book in the country. So I went back the third time. And I said, well, look, you know, I had #1 and #2 selling book in the country, you know, with G.I. Joe and Wolverine. Doesn't that prove something? And they said, oh no, Wolverine is a fluke also. It's not like the other X-Men. And I said, well, what else have you got? You know, and he said, well, we got this other book that we're about to cancel. I said, okay, I'll take it. You know, they said, yeah, it's a group book. Nobody wants to do these group books anymore. I said, and it was the Avengers. So, but again, I was never offered any other book that was considered A-list at the time it was offered to me. But you know, and it was hard to live through because the entire time I was writing G.I. Joe at Marvel, I didn't get invited to a single convention or anything. I was a non-person in comic fandom. Wow. I did 8 years of Wolverine and never got a single review in a fanzine. The gatekeepers of comic fandom, to them I was, you know, a hack that did toy books, so I didn't count. So I, you know, had to do all this stuff in total obscurity, sitting in my office by myself for like 15 years. And it was only maybe in the last 10 years that I started getting invites to cons because my actual readers, who were 10 years old back in 1982, were now old enough to have disposable incomes, and they wanted those books and those toys that they couldn't get as a kid. So anyway, that's the way I got into G.I. Joe.
Well, I could say for everybody who's sitting here right now, not only thank you for the great work that you did on the book, but as today is Armed Forces Appreciation Day, thank you for your service as well.
You can thank my draft forge for that.
Now, I know, Mr. Hama, you were very heavily involved, of course, with the comic book across the decades, but we are sitting here as well with people who were involved with the cartoon. So Mr. Hama is the origin of so many of the things that we love about G.I. Joe. How did that translate to the animated series for not only the voice actors, but the writers of that show as well?
Well, we've got three of us up here. Lisa, did you audition for the show in Los Angeles? How did you come to?
I did. I auditioned in Los Angeles, and that was I don't want to. You go ahead and talk about that, and then I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
You want me to jump in on it now?
You started, and I'll jump in.
Okay. So I was kind of new to Los Angeles, and I was very excited because I got a commercial agent. That's what everybody wanted to get, a commercial agent. And so I was with whatever they were, Worms Are Held Fun and Joseph, something like that.
Sure.
And I'd signed with them, and about a day later, I get a telephone call from the guy who's the head of the voiceover department there, who is a guy named Don Pitts. I don't know if anybody knows.
I am Don Pitts of your shoes.
Yeah, that's right. Don Pitts, and he called me up just like that. He goes, hey, hi, it's Don Pitts. Have you ever done any voiceover work? And I'm thinking, well, I'm a singer. No, I haven't done it. He goes, well, I got a cartoon series for you that nobody was saying animation. I got to go up on a cartoon series. See if you can go in there. I said, well, what is it? He goes, something called G.I. Joe. And I said, well, do you have any material? He says, just go over there early. Go over there early and ask them to look at something. I said, well, what is the character? He goes, I don't know. It's a cartoon series. Go on over there. So I go to Wally Burrs, okay, who's very famous in the industry, certainly for G.I. Joe, he directed all of those shows. I got there early and I told him who I was, and he said, I said, now, what do you have? And he handed me a sheet of paper and he said, work on it for about 10 minutes. I said, well, what is it? Am I a good guy, a bad guy? And he just showed me the drawing. And he said, I don't know, come up with something, give me a few things. I swear to God, and he said, can you do Cockney? You might want to try that. I said, yeah, okay. So I worked on it for like 10 minutes. And then he said, all right, ready to come in the booth? Went in the booth, and it was like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. I gave him a couple of passes. He says, okay, great, thank you very much. I went home and I thought, well, I don't know anything about that, but I'm thinking that was not good. I had no idea. I swear to God, like later that day, at like 4:30, the phone rang, and it was our buddy Don Pitts again, and he goes, hey, yeah, you got the job. I said, the voiceover job? Yeah. He says, and good news. I said, what? He goes, it's a series. And I went, what? Had no idea. I had no idea. That's the only time that happened to me in my life in the industry, where I went in on a very first time, having no experience in that particular avenue, and I landed it. And I mean, I had a great time, and it was wonderful. I met great people, worked with some of the best in the business in terms of animation, and just actors that were really, really great at their craft. And if anybody had stopped me then and said to me, where do you think you'll be in 20, 23, 24, 25, 26? The first answer would be, hopefully alive, hopefully above ground. And I would never have thought that I would be sitting here in a panel about that show.
Yeah.
It impacted people's lives beyond comprehension, and I only found that out when I went to the first con. So no, truly, who knew? I didn't know. So that was my baptism by fire on that show.
And I was reluctant to audition for G.I. Joe originally. My day job was actually at night. I was an ESL instructor in Los Angeles, teaching thousands of immigrants English, and I loved the work. It was great work. And I was doing it alongside coming up as a young, earnest voice actor. And I was teaching during the day, which was unusual for me, but I had a little day job teaching ESL to adults, and the time for the audition, or I was invited to audition, and I thought, oh crikey, it's daytime. How am I gonna, I really can't get out of my classroom. So I snuck out. I got a friend to sub in for me. I didn't tell the district, I just left. And I'm driving there and I'm like, I don't know, man, it's a war show. Do I want to do a war show? Maybe not, I don't know. And then I thought to myself, well, what are the chances that you're gonna book it? I thought, just go, you're not gonna get the gig, and it'll be fine. And showed up, there was a line of actors snaking practically around the block. And Billy will pick up at that part of the story, but I went inside and there was Wally Burr, and he stood me at the music stand in the booth, and he said, I want you to say, yo, Joe. I want you to yell, yo, Joe. Yo, Joe. I said, more. And I'm not one of these actors not one of these female actors who has trouble making noise. I'm very happy to make noise, big, bold noise. And so I kept just backing away further and further from the mic. Yo, Joe! Getting louder and louder. And then he said, yeah, that'll do, thanks very much. And
That was it?
It was a few lines and a lot of yo, Joe.
Okay.
Take 42, yo, Joe. And originally they were meant to see me for a much smaller role, but he saw Lady J, he later told me, when I auditioned. There were no callbacks, as you just said. And we got the call that we got booked. And just before that I thought, well, I won't get the job, and if I get the job, then I'll decide what I want to do. And I got the job, and I'm like, oh, hell yes, I'm doing G.I. Joe. And ever since then, certainly since we've been going to cons together, it's been our joy, our deep joy and pleasure, not only to hang with these knuckleheads, but to be with all of you guys and to keep the story alive. Because I believe there's something important and magic in G.I. Joe, and it's something that we need to keep, it's a story we need to keep telling to our kids and our grandkids, and I'm super glad all you guys are here today. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Mary McDonald Lewis, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, darling.
So Mary and I met in a voiceover workshop, and we were in our early 30s, and it's like an acting class, only you don't have to have a nice face.
Thank God.
I was an FM disc jockey on an easy listening station. There was Malvani Orchestra playing Jumping Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones. And we had voiceover agents, which didn't really mean a lot if the phone didn't ring, but the phone rang once. You got an audition for G.I. Joe, and my dad had given me a G.I. Joe comic book from the 50s. With G.I. Joe was the character, big square jaw, and he fought the Korean War, and I said, well, what is it? Is it a commercial? I don't know, just go.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were literally about 75 of us on another brutal day in Southern California, 80 degrees, sun was shining outside, Wally Burr Recording, a little post-production company near Universal in Studio City. And there were old actors from the Virginian, Gunsmoke, old character actors, and then Mary standing right behind me going, yo, Joe, yo, Joe. and the production person was handing out single sheets of rough, crude, black and white Xeroxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I got Flint, the guy with big pecs, really nice.
Typecast again.
Yeah. And so one by one, we walk up the steps and we make it in. We know it was like a half-hour wait. It was sort of interesting. We're seeing friends and so on. Hey, what are you auditioning for? Stargate, and Chimpanzee Man, all kinds of names. And because Hasbro was in the toilet, their stock was in the toilet, their earnings were low, the Vietnam War had ended, parents were not buying G.I. Joe, the 11.5-inch character at all. So when George Lucas came out with a 3.5-inch Star Wars character making billions of dollars, Hasbro said, we've got an idea. How about the Joe team? And so there were, I think, 8 or 10 characters being auditioned for by 75 people. And finally I get in the booth, and there's Wally Burr, and there's Hasbro execs and Deke execs, and this booth, for producers not much bigger than this, with like 15 people staring at us. All right, Bill Ratner, Flint, go. All right, Lady J, you better get your battle gear on, because Cobra's on their way, and I can't bring it up, blah, 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 blah. And Wally Burr sighs, and he goes, listen, I was the youngest tank commander in World War II. You don't sound military, Bill. Take 2. All right, Lady J, you better get your battle gear on, blah, blah, blah. All right, thank you, next. Another day, another $9. And a couple weeks later, the phone rings, you got the job. You go, what's it for? They didn't say miniseries, they didn't say series. I thought it was a commercial for a smaller G.I. Joe action figure. And here was Michael Bell as Duke, and here's Scarlet, and here's Lady J, and here's Destro and Cobra Commander. 6 of us, microphones lined up. Young woman comes in and passes out scripts and says, I'm supposed to tell you that no one dies in G.I. Joe. But it's a war cartoon, we're killing Cobra, right? Well, the National PTA has gotten involved. We can't get it on the networks on Saturday morning TV, so it's being sold as a mini-series to independent stations around the country. Oh, okay. And we think that you should buy Hasbro stock. For real.
Yeah.
And we looked at each other and thought, well, we're going to prop up Hasbro by buying their stock? I don't think so. Or maybe this is insider trading. If I had bought 10 shares of Hasbro stock that day, I'd be wearing a much nicer jacket today. That's my story.
I think the jacket looks mighty fine. Great. In terms of Hasbro, Marvel, what amount of involvement did they have in either the writing process or the recording process? Were they a presence that intervened, or did you kind of have the free reign to take the characters where you wished?
From our end of it, Hasbro was directly involved. And they went outside the ring in Hollywood of 100 or so working cartoon writers, and hired writers from episodic television who were writing detective stories and so on. They wanted more complex writing, and they wanted better acting. The typical Hanna-Barbera and Disney voiceover session for cartoons, for television, was maybe 60, 90 minutes. Wally Burr kept us for 4.5, 5 hours.
Oh.
Do it again,
Take
do it
it,
again.
take
They
it,
wanted,
take it.
and Hasbro said, we want more sophisticated looking animation. They went to Japan. And most of the animation was done in Burbank, some of the in-betweening and zooming and tilting and panning, which Disney was doing in cinema, was not being done on American television. The Japanese were doing it. So what they created was a mutant animation for G.I. Joe and Transformers, where the colors popped and the characters moved, and the mouths moved naturalistically, and the acting was better.
Yeah, exactly. It was more cinematic, I think, that made a difference, and I think it makes a difference for you guys, for your enjoyment of the cartoons as well.
Well, I think because they were influenced by anime,
Yes.
you know, which is a major factor. It's also a lot of the animation actually went to Korea.
Right, as well, yes.
There was a director at Marvel Productions who built a whole facility in Seoul, and then he later snagged The Simpsons.
Oh,
Same guy.
interesting.
You know, Korean director, producer. You know. But that's what got him started.
Yeah.
And like, talk about a gig that lasts forever.
Yes, yes.
You get on The Simpsons, you know,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
like,
I think I have a friend that's been on it 31 years.
Wow.
Yeah, most of them have.
31 years.
Yeah, exactly.
It's mind-boggling.
I remember the day Nancy Cartwright showed up to a SAG meeting when SAG had the church on, it was a Hollywood Boulevard, they owned that
Oh, yeah.
building for a little while.
Yeah, yeah.
And she walked in and she goes, I just got this job, but I don't really understand, I'm being paid series, like, she was paid episodic, 30-minute episodic.
Like
television.
nighttime money.
Yeah, she was paid nighttime money.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Yeah.
I believe so,
She
yeah.
told a crowded
Where-
room, we were there for some SAG meeting.
this was after SAG was on Sunset.
It was in the church, at the church,
Oh, right, okay.
yeah.
Well, you did say that the show was a remarkable improvement over things like we've seen in Hanna-Barbera, not only in terms of animation, storylining, but one of the, storytelling. And one of the aspects of storytelling that we see in G.I. Joe that was atypical at the time was very strong female characters. And I know, Miss McDonald, you had played Lois Lane on Super Friends. And Lois Lane, sometimes in media, is always depicted as that damsel in distress. But in G.I. Joe, we saw the inverse, both on the side of our heroes and our villains. Was that a conscious effort on everyone's part to make sure that there was a defiance of that damsel in distress trope?
You know, Billy has an interesting theory about that. He reflects on who was writing the show at the time, and that things were happening in the culture that were new and different, and that allowed for a broader interpretation and a stepping away from tropes and into new territory. You talked about these writers being the sons and daughters of feminists who were kind of coming up on Ms. Magazine and Betty Friedan, and so how they in their own homes had been influenced by a different kind of woman. And even you guys talk about being latchkey kids, and that means that your moms were out there working as well. And so we were seeing a change in the role that women played in the in our culture. And so it did allow for something that wasn't based on something as tedious as a person's sexuality. It was brains and courage and creativity and morals and these kinds of elements that drove her forward, and drove the bad guy gals forward too. Because remember, bad guys don't think they're bad. They have their own standards that they're living by as well, and they needed to, and they also were strong in their right.
Well, yeah, I think the other factor that was really important was that the audience itself was changing. Now, you know, a lot of people who are younger don't realize that in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, 50% of comic book sales was women, girls. because there were whole companies that just catered to girls. There was
No,
like
that's
Little Lulu Comics and Harvey Comics and Archie Comics
Yeah.
and romance.
The
comics.
romance ones, yeah.
I mean, Jack Kirby, who was like the king of action,
Yes.
he cut his teeth doing romance books. He was like one of the kings of romance. Him and Johnny Romita Sr. did all the romance books at Marvel. Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
And before, superheroes.
Well before.
Yeah, and because superheroes didn't exist even, And, because I know that once I started doing G.I. Joe as a comic, I started getting up to 200 letters a week from kids, and about 20 or 30% of them were girls.
Wow.
And they all said the same thing. Here's the thing, is that like, if there's 5 kids in a family, and one of them brings reading material into the household, like, a book or a magazine, all the other kids read it,
Sure.
even no matter what their sex is, I mean, I read all my girl cousins' Archie comics and Little Lulus and stuff like that. They read my Supermans and Batmans, and because it was there, and all these girls said, I used to read my brother's, superhero comics, and all the girls in them were constantly standing around with their palms nailed to their foreheads. Or they were constantly taking showers in the X-Mansion, or they were, it's all stuff written by, guys that didn't know a lot of women. Because I realized, what they all said was that, like, in G.I. Joe, the women were treated exactly the same as the guys. They went on the same missions. There weren't, any special accommodations for them. They did the same job, and they were treated exactly alike, and they had respect. And like, to a 10-year-old or 11-year-old girl, this is like, oh.
Yeah, this is probably the first time they're seeing that.
Yeah, this is different.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Also, there's the marketing angle.
Yeah.
If it's 50% of viewers are young females,
Yes,
create more action figures that are female, and it results in more sales.
exactly.
I mean, not that Hasbro is not a morally and ethically superior company, closer to God than Dow Chemical, but they were also interested in their stock price and profit.
Yeah.
It was so funny, when I first started doing these, which was 2023, it was Joe Fest in Augusta, Georgia, which is, if some of you probably have been there, because if you're diehard Joe fans, that's a big show, big con. And I remember that one fan came over to me, and it was a girl and her brother, and they both said, what we loved so much about your character? And I said, no, what? And they both at the same time said, you were a badass. and I said, I was? And they said, oh yeah, because we didn't get to see that a whole lot, but we thought, if Zorana could do it, we could do it. You were just bad, and you were undercover, and you were doing, and I thought, okay, so they saw an empowered woman. Yeah, is what
Both
they
those
saw.
poor kids
Even
are in
though I
jail
was-
today.
Even though I was technically,
Yeah.
There's a reason
Bad.
why the Baroness is the most cosplayed G.I. Joe character, or none.
I'm sitting right here.
Yeah, it's like,
She's bad.
But the ones that I see most cosplayed are Baroness, Lady J, and Zorana.
yeah,
Interesting.
yeah.
Interesting, yeah.
Well, Lady J is easy. You just go to the Army Circus.
That's for sure.
I know. She's
Yeah,
I
You
do
don't
believe I
have
saw
to
Baroness
be,
walking around here
be
today.
building stuff out of foam and things.
Exactly, it's very
Listen, I give a lot of credit. There was a woman at Joe Fest, my first time, and now she follows me, okay? She came dressed as Zorana and had a Jeep that she tricked out, the Jeep from the
I've
show.
met her. I've
Yes,
met her.
I forget her name right now.
Yeah.
She drove from Tennessee to Georgia on the main highway with the missiles off the back of that Jeep. And I said to her, oh my God, did the cops pull you over? And with a straight face, she said, oh, no, nobody would do that. No, I told them I was going here, and that was, I thought, okay.
I voted that Jeep in the Dragon Con
You
G.I.
did?
Joe parade.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was like riding the Jeep going like,
Wait.
It was
like Queen
hysterical.
Elizabeth.
It was really funny.
One of the more amusing things that happened in reaction to all this, in 1990, which is about 5 years after Transformers and G.I. Joe was produced, and it was on TV at the time, at NYU was created the BLO, the Barbie Liberation Organization. And it was a bunch of grad students, art students, who went and purchased 150 talking Duke dolls, because they made Duke into a 12.5-inch talking doll. The first year they come out with voice chips for action figures and dolls, and Teen Talk Barbie, and brought them back to NYU to the art department, slid open the boxes, put in a manifesto about
Corporate whatever.
yeah, and swapped the chips, and said one of the things it said in the manifesto was, dear parent who purchased this, if this ticks you off, call your local TV station, call NBC, call CNN. So on Christmas Day, and you can Google this, Barbie Liberation Organization, on Christmas Day, cameras were all over suburban New York and Long Island, taping families where the little kid had opened, hey son, got you a talking Duke doll, you love G.I. Joe. Yeah, well just pull the string and it's got the chip in it. And Duke opened his mouth and said, I'm not really very smart at math. You girls want to go shopping? The story. And Barbie said, Yo, Joe, Kid Cobra, let's go all the way. And they were never caught.
Wow, brilliant.
Well, they couldn't tell the difference.
If there are any members of the BLO out here right now,
Yeah,
we
exactly.
are still looking for you. You also, you mentioned that earlier in the days of the show, whether it was through the comics or the cartoon, not much adoration, not much acknowledgement amongst the communities. As you said, majority of the people watching the show were of young age, but now that we're all older and with a little bit more expendable money, could buy Cold Slither t-shirts and G.I. Joe shirts. Have there been any standout positive reactions from maybe even surprising groups that have resonated with the characters that you've either created or played?
You know, I think it must be the incipient ESL teacher in me. I'm always touched when people, and we've all had this experience, when people come up to us and tell us they learned English by watching G.I. Joe.
Right.
And I think that's great in terms of promulgation of culture and promulgation of our language. That's always touched me.
The marketing director, Larry, do you remember the name of the marketing director, Hasbro at the time?
Vinny DeLiva.
Yeah, I think so, was at a con and responsible for the advertising and print and TV and so on. And I asked him, I said,
Zikian was the second in charge of the brand.
Mhm.
And, was it, I just blanked on his name, the guy that actually came up with the whole concept of doing, of circumventing the Saturday morning rules.
oh, right,
By
right.
having.
By playing the commercials for the comic
First
books.
Amendment protection.
Yeah.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
He said, look, you can't regulate a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
That's guaranteed by the First Amendment.
One A.
So I think the original rules were that you could only have 5 or 7 seconds of animation in a 1-minute cartoon, because the rest of the ad had to be actual photography of the real crappy toy.
And you couldn't advertise the toy within the show.
Yeah, you couldn't make the toy do things it couldn't actually do.
So they aired your commercials for the comic book
Right.
within G.I. Joe, because it was not an ad for an action figure, it was an ad for a comic book.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And that's protected by the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
But, they made sure that comic book they were doing the ad for contain all the characters and vehicles that they wanted to show them.
Exactly, yeah.
So it was, so all of the stuff, the comics and the animated shows were just commercials.
Yeah.
So I said to the marketing director, the gaming companies, Electronic Arts and so on, must really be cleaning up with action figures. He said, not at all. They've discontinued them. I said, why? I said, because gamers are gamers. They're at their screens. They're not playing with action figures. And we were at a Hasbro Joe-Con, and there was a 30-year-old there who knew everything about every episode of every television cartoon ever made, and had his action figure collection. And his mom and dad were there. So being a smart ass, I turned to his mom and said, how do you feel about your 30-year-old son playing with action figures? And she said, well, he and I both teach in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania school system. And half of my 9th grade class was illiterate. And so I went to my son, the 30-year-old, and borrowed his G.I. Joe VHS's, comic books, and action figures. And the principal said, do whatever you want to do. These kids can't even read. By the end of the year, by getting the kids to watch the videos, read the comic books in class, and then write their fan fiction G.I. Joe episodes, she had raised, according to her, the literacy level of her 9th grade English inner city class by 50%.
Wow.
So I went, yo, Joe.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many people have had come up and tell me that they learned how to read the G.I. Joe comics, that they were like dyslexic, or they had some sort of, difficulty, and that this was a way for
But
them.
the desire, the hunger to know what was on the page.
You had to find out what was on the page.
Yeah, right, so good.
As a teacher and as a parent, thank you very much for that. That's definitely a great way to get children to read, and get children to learn the language. In your experience, and I know that I believe you have an MA in psychiatry. Have you found that, or do you believe really that it's the responsibility of these production companies that are gearing these television shows towards children to have that message embedded within it? And we all famously know that G.I. Joe generally ended with some message about safety, whether it's don't eat styrofoam or something. Do you think it's important that I know shows like Silverhawks, I know shows like Thundercats employ child psychiatrists? Do you think even to this day that should be a part of the production?
Wow, that's a rough one. I think that there's a greater, and I can only speak now because I actually don't watch any animation presently, so I can't really speak to that right now, except I might watch old school stuff. But I think certainly in nighttime television, there has to be some better control over, and I'm not a person who's pro-censorship, but I get very concerned about how much violence there is towards women in particular in nighttime stuff or movies. And in that area, I think it's a good idea to have some, I don't want to say restrictions, but there has to be some stuff in place, because younger and younger people are watching it, they're streaming it, it's harder to have controls over things. I mean, everything's available to anyone all the time. And while I do think, as I said again, I'm not pro-censorship, but I think there have to be some guards up, some guardrails up, so that it doesn't become okay to just see violence over and over again. Violence or mistreatment or, racism, any of those things. In that regard, when I speak from my position as having a master's degree in psychology, I do get worried about that. Because for a while when I was practicing and I saw people coming in as clients, there are a lot of people filled with rage. They're filled with fury, and they sometimes don't even know why they are filled with that. And then you kind of talk to them as a therapist and you see, well, what do you do in your spare time? Well, what do you like to watch? And then as the therapist, you get to hear and you think, oh boy, this has to be hitting them at a certain level where it becomes at the soul level, the spirit level. And we have to be careful in that area so that people are, you know, a bit feeling whole and complete and without all of that, fury, pain, or rage that they're carrying on. So that's probably more long-winded, but I don't know how to apply that currently to animation because most of the stuff I have seen have been the Disney things. And, I mean, you know, they seem kind of, I don't know, harmless to me, but I don't, I don't go into that, I don't watch all of that stuff, so I really can't speak about that, but that would be my answer to that. I just say, be aware of what you're watching, and especially if your
Oh,
younger
yeah, but
people are watching.
The problem with Disney was always that they were stuck in that princess.
Yes, that's a problem
you know,
too,
and
yes.
That's the exact opposite problem.
Exactly,
it's
but it
also
is a
this-
problem,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Because, you know, princesses are like, they get taken care of.
Right.
You know, with princes, you know?
Yeah, and then when that doesn't happen, uh-oh.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
uh-oh.
exactly.
So it
Well,
goes
but
both
they-
ways.
I mean, they departed from that a little bit with like Mulan.
Right.
You know, where they actually had like real, you know.
Yeah.
A little angst.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Well, and
a little
women
angst.
who were their own, they had agency.
yeah, right, exactly. But then, you know, in the last 20, 30 years, there's a huge trend to have like badass, tough-ass women. You know, you got like, you know, like Salt, and you got the, you know, Atomic Blonde. You had these, you know, women like just kicking ass.
Warrior women.
Michelle Yeoh. I mean, one after the other.
Yeah, that's true, absolutely. Lots of role models these days.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, that started in the, you know, Run Shaw, you know, kung fu movies and
Yeah.
martial arts movies, you know.
Yeah.
It was,
Well, that's because it wasn't just strength. You
But
know,
there was a
skill.
big star, what was her name, May May Lin. She was an action star from Run Shaw, but she was a dancer, right? So she could do,
All the flips and all that
she
stuff.
could do these like triple leaps and, you know, and,
Yeah.
like, you know, jump up in the air and kick 3 people in the face, you know, and it wasn't like wire work, it was, you know,
Yeah, it was her.
she was actually capable of doing this stuff, and, you know, I remember when I first saw that stuff, I'm like, holy smoke, this is like.
It's a real deal.
It was a real deal. Yeah, but the movies she did that stand out were like, Come Drink With Me, which is a classic.
This guy is a font of knowledge, can I just say, his stories, oh,
But,
can't beat him.
yeah, and the Japanese were doing, you know, they had like, these Yakuza princesses with these, you know, these women gamblers. Whip out that sword and cut down everybody, you know. So, you know, the tradition was there, you know, in
Yeah.
coming out of Asian cinema. It was never there in European cinema.
No. We're concerned about different things.
Yeah.
Very different things.
We are 40 years removed from the beginning of the G.I. Joe franchise, both in comics, cartoons, toys, and yet here we are, and the franchise is still as relevant as ever. What do you think has contributed to that longevity? We've seen G.I. Joe recently in movies. Obviously, the toy line is still going strong. The comic book is still going strong. What do you think has contributed to that longevity?
I think, you know, I attribute it to Hasbro and especially to Wally Burr, the great Wally Burr, who directed every episode of Transformers and G.I. Joe, who beat the heck out of us to get decent, naturalistic acting performances, which was, like I said earlier, a little different, a little better than the average cartoon. Not that Hanna-Barbera didn't do incredible fun stuff, but it's very charactery and funny and
Right.
and
Well,
silly
that's the thing,
and animal-like and so on. But these are human beings speaking in real manners who are characters.
Well, people remember characters.
Yeah.
You know, the characters, you know, plot is just something that you is a framework that you hang great characters on.
Yeah.
I used to tell, when I was an editor at Marvel, I used to tell my writers, like, well, have you ever read Peanuts? And they go, well, sure, read it all my life. And I go, well, tell me what happens in any one given Sunday Peanuts strip. Nobody can tell you. They all go, oh, Lucy's holding the football. Charlie Brown comes running across, and that's just a setup. That's the setup for every one of those things. Tell me exactly what, one of the, and I said, look, you don't go see the next Harry Potter movie because you said, oh man, the plot to that last Harry Potter movie was bitchin'.
I gotta go see the next one.
Right. You can't even remember the plot, but you could, if I said, write a psychological profile of Hermione, write a profile of, any of these characters, you could, because you've met these characters the same way you meet real people in little increments every day.
In a very intimate setting by yourself, in the den, mom and dad aren't home, you're 9 years old, and you're with these characters.
I think there's
And if the characters are consistent,
Yes.
they really stick with you.
Yes, that's right. And, interestingly, Larry, for as brief as G.I. Joe was in terms of the number of episodes and the amount of time that it ran, the resonance, the echoes, the longevity is quite stunning in comparison. The tail of this comet is much longer than the comet itself.
Sure.
And I think that the other thing that contributes that's kind of along the same lines as what you were saying is that these characters, if we think of Greek myths, if we think of Shakespeare, if we think of Jung, if we think of grand traditions of opera, you're working with metaphors, various facets of humankind.
And archetypes.
These are archetypes. You've got the warrior, you've got the priest, you've got the lovers, and that's an actual trope, right? You've got the jester, the fool, the wise fool. So, and G.I. Joe had those eternal characters, and I think that's why there is an eternality to this product.
And also, my question, when Mary called me, I think about 2-3 years after Joe went off the air initially, and said, do you want to go to the Hasbro G.I. Joe Con? I said, what is that? I had no idea. She said, are you near your computer? And so the question arose in me, why was this show, as Tom had just asked the question, why is this show enduring? What's the emotional connection? And I finally learned it when I was at Hotel del Coronado in Southern California. That was it was featured in the movie The Stuntman with Peter O'Toole. Beautiful old 19th century tourist hotel on the beach of the Pacific Ocean. And I rented you could listen to the history of the Del Coronado for $5 and put the headphones on, walked onto the sand, and it's the voice of the great Hans Conried, who was Captain Hook and all these terrible evil characters. Yes, when I was a kid, I started crying. And he's going, the history of the hotel, but it was the voice, and tears are coming to my eyes. I thought, why is this so, I heard this man every day of my life from age 9 to about 14, playing these characters, getting into my psyche, manipulating me, dramatically. And that's when I understood what is it about the voice? What is it about a character? What is it about old-time radio that your grandparents and great-grandparents listened to night after night after night to hear these same characters?
Sure.
There's a magic to it. If it's decent writing, if it's fun to watch or listen to, if it's a good performance, and if it's a child, if it's a kid, it's going to make an impression and it's going to last.
Thank you. And as we talk about the characters, you can look around now and you can see people bringing these characters to life. Spirit, Storm Shadow, Destro, Snake Eyes. And you see a crowd full of people that the show, the comic, the medium, the franchise has resonated with across the medium. So I think now would be a good chance, and if that's okay with you, to open up to the audience to see if anyone has some questions.
Yeah, please.
My friend up there.
Mike? Right. I just want to ask, G.I. Joe is Hasbro based off a toy. And as the years went on, the toys became more and more extravagant. So we had to write stories and do plot lines for, let's say, the Destro Space Laser or the Mutagen Virus 2000 or whatever. How was like writing it, and then you have to go on to like gobbledygook techno battle when you actually had to do the voice acting for it. They got the Destro Space Laser with a multi-virus, blah, 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 blah. You had to sell it.
I just ignored all that stuff. I never had lasers in the comic. You know, they were. I was very specific. I said they had, you know, an AK-47 M2, you know, or an A model Uzi. You know, I tried to use all stuff that I'd actually shot. You know, because. It always used to bother me as a kid, you know, when I would see this in comics, that like, they weren't like reloading, you know, the weapons were never shown in recoil, you know, you never saw anything ejecting, you know. So when I started doing that in the comics, and all of a sudden I realized that, you know, everybody else was like, started drawing shells ejecting, you know? But they had no concept. You know, they would draw a guy with a submachine gun with a 20-round magazine, and there'd be like 150 shells ejecting. Yeah, I mean, I've already forgotten what the question was.
It was dealing with the ad copy that they wanted you to interject into the comics.
Yeah, well, that's.
Which you said you ignored, which is
Yeah,
probably the
and
wisest thing.
they would, sometimes they would like spring this stuff on me, and they could go, oh, we got this great idea, we're gonna kill off Cobra Commander in the movie, and I said, that's a really bad idea. And they went ahead and did it, and I got like hundreds and hundreds of letters from kids saying they would never buy G.I. Joe again, because
Failed them.
Cobra Commander was
Never.
like, you know, he was a fave,
Yeah.
you know? People don't seem to understand that, like, in these genres, the antagonist is just as popular, you know, that's why you can make a whole movie about the Joker.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, right? I mean, and you know, in X-Men you got Magneto, you got, you know, all these characters that they're fighting that are just as interesting and you know, fascinating as the good guys.
Also, you mentioned all this stuff getting a little weirder and crazier, and I think that happens with every television show after, you know, the 52 episodes.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think, Bob? I don't know. Pickles that smile. I don't know. What do you think? What do you call it?
I'm not sure that's
And so, you know, that's one thing. And the other, the invention of 85 characters at the end of the series.
Well, that's the
More
amazing
and more
thing.
and more for marketing.
There was that many characters
Wow.
that, you know, people could distinctly,
Yeah.
you know, remember. And the number of episodes that were actually, how many episodes of animation were there actually in existence? Like, you know the number?
52 of the first 2 seasons.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
not a
there's-
lot.
No.
No.
But when you also consider that, like, you know, what was the entire run of the Honeymooners?
Oh,
It was like,
God, nothing.
like 30 episodes
Yeah,
or
is that
something.
right? And it feels like
It feels like
tons.
it
Yeah,
was
it does.
there forever.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing with, you know, I Love Lucy.
Yes, I was just gonna say, absolutely.
There aren't that many
It felt
episodes.
endless, yeah. Other questions?
Our noble friend who's trying to save the clock tower, right there.
So I was a huge fan of G.I. Joe, watched it every day, and after school. I noticed like it never really had an ending. Like we didn't, like as fans we got no notice, like all of a sudden it was just gone. I'm curious, how did they let you guys know that it was done? Did you get notice? Did you know that it was coming to an end, or?
The Screen Actors Guild, the animation department, actors were working, for Disney, Fox, Hanna-Barbera, everybody. And TV cartoons were really, really popular, and the networks were making a ton of money. And they were asking actors to do, I would do Flint, okay, do the security guy, okay, do the chef in a different voice, okay, do the dog that walks onto the blah, blah, blah. And actors were going home losing their voices because of it. So there were meetings held, and we were working under the Screen Actors Guild contract. And negotiations came up, which they do every 3 years, and the Screen Actors Guild said, listen, Hanna-Barbera, Disney, etc., we're going to limit it to 3 different characters per session. You can have him do the good guy, the bad guy, and the dog, but not 5 or 6 voices, because these people are losing their voices, and they can't work. And Deke said specifically to us, it wasn't our protest, because they weren't doing it. Hanna-Barbera didn't do that to us. But the majority of the unit, a few thousand actors, said, we're going to strike. And Deke, the distributor, said, you guys strike, we're going to Canada. And so we were suddenly out of work, except for Destro and Cobra Commander. They took those voices to Montreal or wherever they recorded. And everybody else was, oh, it was so cool outside. I said, almost sounded like I was born in the suburbs of Toronto. And that, as you all know, lasted for a year, and then it was off the air.
Yeah, I remember they voice matched, because we all lost it, and they found somebody, they voice matched me in Canada.
Yeah.
And I only found out, because of the internet now, you can find everything. I happened to Google something about G.I. Joe, and some fan had put, okay, you decide, who do you like better as Zorana? Lisa Raggio, and then whoever the Canadian person was that I don't know, bless that person. And I thought, oh, so that's who, but it never really went anywhere.
Yeah.
It never went anywhere.
But that's the reason why
Yeah.
it ended at 52 episodes after 2 years, because the union went on strike and Deke made good on their threat,
Yeah.
and thus killed the series. I mean, we could have gone on for who knows how long.
Yeah.
Yet another reason to dislike Canada. Here we go. Spirit has a question.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the great work you guys did. It's just a wonderful time in my life. I wanted to ask the cast of G.I. Joe voiceover if you had to recommend one episode to someone who's never watched it before, what would that episode be and why?
The sunscreen episode between Lady J and Flint on the roof of G.I. Joe
I'm not
headquarters.
surprised.
No, Mainframe, between Zorana and Mainframe, the big love thing.
Yeah.
Actually, some fan came over to me at one of these cons and said, do you know why they didn't continue that romance? And I thought, no, I don't. I have no idea why they didn't continue that romance. It made me laugh though.
I think the episode, I can't help but notice that we're all speaking of our own characters as we talk about the best episode.
Yes.
But they're kind of the ones that spring to mind, are the ones that we remember. I think when Lady J figures out that she's related to Destro. It's pretty interesting, pretty Shakespearean. Yeah.
We have a few minutes left. We're going to take this as our last question.
This is just something, to Mr. Hama. How many of the characters that you created over the years of any of the books that you wrote on, you pull from your own, like, maybe it was someone you knew or something, maybe someone you saw on the street, that you sort of have a flash of someone and then you just develop a character from that? And are there any that stand out?
About 95% of the G.I. Joe characters are based on real people that I knew. They're not the character.
Yeah.
But what I overlaid, personality, character traits, and quirks. And the reason I chose people I knew was that it was a frame of reference that I could keep everything consistent, because I never wrote outlines. I wrote 332 issues without knowing what's on page 5 until I got to page 4. You know, this is,
That's very interesting.
because I figured out early that if I knew the denouement, if I knew how it ended, it was very difficult for me not to telegraph it.
Oh.
And I know that when I watch TV or anything, you know, like, you know, most shows, after like 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I know how it's gonna end, and I get bored, you know. The only people that really surprised me all the time were guys like Cormac McCarthy. I never knew how any of those chapters was gonna end, you know. And whoever was writing Peaky Blinders,
Great show.
I mean, my God.
Yes.
Oh,
fabulous.
You could not predict what was gonna happen. It was like always like, you know,
Yep,
this
I agree.
startling surprise. And there's not many things like that, because people like, I mean, when I talk to say people, I mean producers.
Yeah, right.
They like the same stuff that they know, that they can control, that, you know, doesn't, you know, make any problems.
Doesn't rock the boat.
Doesn't rock the boat. They say, oh, okay, I understand how
And I
this
know
one
what to do
works.
with that.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you stray away from that, you know, everybody gets nervous.
I just want to say thank you, everybody, for joining us, and thank you to our amazing panel of guests, Lisa Raggio, Mary McDonald Lewis, Bill Ratner, Larry Hama. And if you enjoyed this, just know that all of our guests are going to be at their table very shortly to continue the conversation, talk to you more, and if you didn't know, now you know, and of course, knowing.
Is half the battle.
Yo, Joe.
Yo, Joe!
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.